The lecture hall buzzed with quiet chatter as students from across the galaxy settled into their seats. Zixtal adjusted their 4 eyes to focus better on the front of the room. Their purple skin shimmered nervously as they pulled out their note-taking device. This was their first advanced xenobiology class at Galactic University, and they wanted to make a good impression. The Vorthak student looked around at their classmates. There were crystalline beings that looked like walking diamonds, furry thermal pods from the ice worlds, and even a few energy creatures that floated near the ceiling. But what caught Zixtal's attention most was the human sitting 2 rows ahead. Humans were still new to the galactic community. They had only joined 50 years ago, which was practically yesterday in galactic time. Zixtal had never seen one up close before. This human had brown hair and was wearing simple blue clothing. They looked so ordinary, so plain compared to the other species in the room. "Good morning, class," came a voice from the front. Zixtal turned to see another human walking to the podium. This one was female, with dark hair pulled back and wearing a white coat.
"I am Dr. Elena Vasquez from Earth University.
Today I will be teaching you about mammalian reproduction across different species." Zixtal's translator device hummed softly in their ear, converting the humans' words into their native language. They had heard that humans spoke many different languages on their home world, which seemed very strange. Most species had one unified way of speaking. Dr. Vasquez began her presentation with images of various creatures from different worlds. She explained how some mammals laid eggs while others gave birth to live young. She talked about gestation periods and mating rituals. Zixtal took careful notes, fascinated by the diversity of life in the galaxy. "Now," Dr. Vasquez continued, "let me tell you about human reproduction, since many of you have asked about our species." The room grew quiet. Everyone was curious about the newcomers to galactic society. "Human females have a monthly fertility cycle," the professor explained. "They can become pregnant roughly once every 28 Earth days during their reproductive years." Several students nodded. This sounded normal to most species. The thermal pods had similar cycles, though theirs happened every few months instead of weeks. "Human males, however," Dr. Vasquez said casually, "are fertile continuously throughout their adult lives. They produce viable reproductive cells every day, without any seasonal breaks or special cycles." The room fell completely silent. Zixtal's 4 eyes widened until they felt like they might fall out of their head. Their note-taking device slipped from their suddenly shaking hands and clattered to the floor. Around the room, other students showed similar signs of shock. A crystalline student made a sound like breaking glass. One of the thermal pods began hyperventilating, their fur standing on end. The energy beings in the ceiling flickered rapidly, which was their version of surprised stammering. "Excuse me," called out a student from the back. Zixtal recognized them as a Rigelian, a species known for their careful approach to everything. "Could you repeat that information about human males?" Dr. Vasquez looked confused by the reaction. "Certainly. Human males do not have breeding seasons. They are reproductively capable year-round every day of their adult lives, barring illness or other complications." More shocked silence filled the room. Zixtal's mind raced. On their homeworld of Vorthak Prime, males entered fertility only once every 3 galactic years. It was a huge celebration when it happened. The entire community would gather to witness the change. Males would grow bright orange spots all over their bodies and sing beautiful songs for 7 days and nights. Females would choose their partners based on the quality of these songs and the brightness of the spots. The idea that males could be fertile all the time seemed impossible. How did human society function? How did they decide when to reproduce? Who made the choices? Dr. Vasquez? Zixtal found themselves speaking before they realized it. Their voice came out as a squeak. "If human males are always fertile, how do you control population growth? Do you have government breeding permits?" The human professor smiled kindly. "No, we don't have breeding permits. Humans make individual choices about when and if they want to have children. We use various methods of birth control to prevent unwanted pregnancies." Individual choices? This came from a hive mind student whose collective consciousness was clearly struggling with the concept. But who decides what is best for the species? Who ensures genetic diversity? Who plans resource allocation for offspring? "We do," Dr. Vasquez replied simply. "Each human couple decides for themselves." The room erupted in confused chatter. Students turned to each other, trying to process this information. Zixtel heard fragments of conversation in dozens of languages, even through their translator. Impossible biological setup. Must lead to chaos. How do they survive as a species? Dr. Vasquez raised her hand for quiet. I understand this might seem strange to species with different reproductive strategies, but this system works well for humans. We have successfully populated our entire planet and now several colony worlds. Zixtel raised their hand again. But doctor, what about the males? If they are always fertile, they must be constantly distracted? On Vorthak Prime during the fertile season, males cannot think about anything else. They forget to eat, forget to work, forget everything except finding a mate. Human males can control their reproductive urges, Dr. Vasquez explained. They can focus on work, study, art, or any other activity regardless of their biological state. In fact, most humans spend the majority of their lives focused on things other than reproduction. This was too much for several students. A group of seasonal spawners from the Rigel system got up and left the room, muttering about biological impossibilities. Some of the younger students looked like they might faint. Zixtel felt their worldview cracking. Everything they thought they knew about biology, about society, about how intelligent species should organize themselves, was being challenged by this calm human professor and her casual explanations. Are there any other questions about human reproduction? Dr. Vasquez asked. Zixtel's hand shot up. Doctor, how long do humans live? If males are fertile their entire adult lives, and if you reproduce whenever you choose, your population must grow very quickly. Humans live about 80 to 100 Earth years on average, the professor replied. And actually, many developed human societies have declining birth rates. Having the ability to reproduce doesn't mean we always choose to do so. Zixtel scribbled notes frantically. Their translator device was getting hot from overuse and small wisps of smoke were starting to curl up from it. They didn't care. This information was too important to miss. The lecture continued, but Zixtel barely heard the rest. Their mind was spinning with questions. How did human families work? How did they choose mates without fertility seasons to guide them? How did their economy function without predictable population cycles? When class ended, Zixtel sat in their seat for several minutes after the other students had left. Dr. Vasquez was packing up her materials when she noticed the still shocked alien student. Are you all right? She asked kindly. Zixtel looked up at her with all four eyes. Doctor, I think I need to learn much more about humans. This information, it changes everything I thought I knew about how intelligent species should live. Dr. Vasquez smiled. That's the beauty of the galaxy, isn't it? So many different ways to exist and thrive. If you're interested in learning more, I'll be here all semester as a visiting professor. Zixtel nodded eagerly, then carefully picked up their smoking translator device. They had a feeling this was going to be a very interesting semester indeed. Zixtel could not sleep that night. They lay in their dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling with all four eyes wide open. Their roommate, a quiet methane breather named Glub, had gone to sleep hours ago. But Zixtel's mind kept racing with questions about what they had learned in Dr. Vasquez's class. How could human males be fertile all the time? It seemed impossible. It seemed dangerous. It seemed fascinating. The next morning, Zixtel decided they needed answers. They knew there was a human student living in the next building over. His name was Jake Morrison, and he was studying galactic history. Zixtel had seen him in the cafeteria eating strange foods that no other species would touch. After breakfast, Zixtel gathered their courage and knocked on Jake's door. When it opened, they found themselves face to face with their first close-up view of a human male. Jake was tall by Vorthak standards with yellow hair and blue eyes. He wore casual clothes and had a friendly expression. Oh, hey, Jake said, looking surprised. You're Zixtel, right? From the xenobiology program? Yes, Zixtel replied, pleased that the human knew their name. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about human biology. Jake laughed. Sure, come on in. Though I should warn you, I'm a history major, not a biology expert. Zixtel entered Jake's room and was immediately struck by how messy it was. Clothes were scattered everywhere. Books were stacked in random piles, and the smell was interesting. Not bad, just very different from what they were used to. So what do you want to know? Jake asked, clearing off a chair for his guest. Zixtel sat down carefully. Yesterday, Dr. Vasquez told our class that human males are fertile all the time. Is this really true? Jake's face turned slightly red, which Zixtal had read was a human sign of embarrassment. Yeah, that's basically correct. Why? But how do you function? Zixtal asked, leaning forward eagerly. On my world, when males become fertile, they cannot think about anything else. They sing constantly, they forget to eat. They abandon all their responsibilities. How does human society work if your males are always in this state? Jake burst out laughing. Oh man, you've got the wrong idea. Just because we're biologically capable doesn't mean we're walking around thinking about reproduction all the time. I mean, sure, humans think about it sometimes, but we also think about food and sleep and homework and movies and sports and a million other things. Zixtal blinked all four eyes in confusion. But the biological drive must be overwhelming. Not really, Jake said, still grinning. Humans are pretty good at controlling their impulses. We have to be, or society would be chaos. Most of the time, I'm way more worried about my galactic history exam next week than I am about finding a mate. This was hard for Zixtal to understand. They pulled out their note-taking device, which they had managed to repair after yesterday's overheating incident. Can you explain how human mating works, then? Without breeding seasons, how do you choose partners? Jake's face got even redder. Well, humans can choose to look for relationships at any time. We don't wait for specific seasons. Some humans have multiple partners throughout their lives, some have just one. Some choose to have no romantic partners at all. No partners at all? Zixtal was shocked. But if they don't reproduce, how do they contribute to the species? Humans contribute in lots of ways, Jake explained. Some people are teachers, some are doctors, some are artists or scientists or engineers. You don't have to have children to be valuable to society. Zixtal wrote this down frantically. On Vorthak Prime, individuals who didn't reproduce during the fertile seasons were considered incomplete. They were cared for by the community, but they were also pitied. What about population control? Zixtal asked.
If humans can reproduce anytime and if males are always fertile, how do you prevent overpopulation?
Jake scratched his head. We have birth control methods. Medical ways to prevent pregnancy even when people are, romantically active. And like Dr. Vasquez said, just because people can have children doesn't mean they always want to. But who decides who should reproduce? Who ensures genetic diversity? Who makes sure the best individuals pass on their traits? Nobody decides that for us, Jake said. Humans make their own choices about having kids. The government doesn't get involved unless there are safety issues. Zixtal's device started smoking again. This was too much information to process. Individual choice in reproduction? No government oversight? No seasonal controls? It seemed like a recipe for disaster. Over the next few days, Zixtal became obsessed with learning more about human culture. They read everything they could find in the university library. They discovered that humans had something called dating, where individuals spent time together to see if they were compatible as partners. They learned about human concepts like love and marriage and divorce. The more Zixtal learned, the more confused they became. Humans seemed to make reproduction unnecessarily complicated. They had elaborate courtship rituals that could last for months or even years. They had ceremonies to mark pair bonding. They even had legal contracts governing their relationships. Word of Zixtal's research began to spread through the alien student community. Other students started approaching them with their own questions and concerns about human reproduction. I heard human males are fertile every day, whispered a thermal pod student in the library. Is it true they don't grow special mating fur or change colors? My clutch sister says humans can choose their own mates without family approval, said a worried hive-mind individual. How do they ensure genetic compatibility? The energy patterns are all wrong, flickered a flux being. How do they synchronize reproductive cycles without stellar guidance? Zixtal found themselves becoming the unofficial expert on human reproduction among the student body. They held impromptu study sessions in their dorm room, sharing what they had learned and trying to answer questions. But the more they explained, the more worried their fellow students became. This sounds dangerous, said Crix, a crystalline student whose faceted body reflected their concern. If humans can reproduce without proper controls, they could overwhelm entire star systems. Maybe that's why they're expanding so quickly, suggested Bloom, a photosynthetic student from the Outer Rim. They can't control their population growth, so they need more planets. Zixtal wasn't sure about these theories, but they were starting to worry too. Humans seem nice enough individually, but what if their reproductive strategy really was a threat to other species? What if their lack of breeding seasons gave them an unfair advantage in colonizing new worlds? Dr. Vasquez had mentioned that humans were successfully spreading to multiple planets. She had said it like it was a good thing. But what if it wasn't? Zixtal decided they needed to learn more. They needed to understand not just the biology, but the implications. They needed to figure out if humanity's reproductive freedom was a wonderful adaptation or a galactic threat. They began planning a research project that would examine human reproduction from every angle. They would study the biological aspects, the social implications, and the potential consequences for other species. They would present their findings to the xenobiology department, maybe even publish a paper. Zixtal had no idea that their innocent academic curiosity was about to create one of the biggest diplomatic incidents in galactic history. 3 weeks later, Zixtal stood outside the university's main auditorium, clutching their presentation materials with sweaty hands. Their research project had grown far beyond what they had originally planned. What started as simple curiosity about human reproduction had become a comprehensive study of comparative reproductive strategies across multiple species. Jake Morrison stood beside them, looking nervous. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "I mean, some of your conclusions seem a bit intense." Zixtal adjusted their formal academic robes with all 4 hands. "The scientific community needs to understand the implications of human reproductive biology," they said firmly. "This could change how we view population dynamics across the galaxy." Inside the auditorium, word had spread about Zixtal's presentation. What was supposed to be a small student research presentation had attracted attention from across the university. The title alone had drawn crowds. The biological advantages of continuous human male fertility, a comprehensive analysis of reproductive strategies and their galactic implications. As they entered the auditorium, Zixtal was surprised to see how many beings had come to listen. The room was packed with students, professors, and even some off-world visitors. Dr. Vasquez sat in the front row, looking curious and slightly concerned. Behind her, Zixtal could see representatives from dozens of different species. The crystalline hive minds had sent a delegation of 7 individuals, all connected by glowing energy threads. The thermal pods from the ice worlds had arrived in their environmental suits, their fur visible through the transparent material. Even some of the energy beings from the upper dimensions had manifested physical forms to attend. Zixtal took their place at the podium and activated the holographic display system. Their first slide appeared in the air above the audience, a chart comparing fertility cycles across 12 different species. "Fellow researchers and students," Zixtal began, their voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "Today I will present my findings on what may be the most significant biological adaptation in the known galaxy, the continuous fertility of human males." A murmur ran through the audience. Several thermal pods shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "As you can see from this chart," Zixtal continued, pointing to their display, "most intelligent species have evolved specific reproductive seasons or cycles. This serves important biological and social functions. It allows for population control, ensures optimal timing for offspring survival, and creates social structures around reproductive events." The audience nodded. This was basic xenobiology that everyone understood. "However," Zixtal said, advancing to their next slide, "humans have evolved a completely different strategy. Human males maintain reproductive capability throughout their adult lives, without any seasonal variation or cyclical control." The next slide showed a comparison of human reproductive rates versus other species. The numbers were stark and, Zixtal had to admit, somewhat alarming when presented this way. "The implications of this adaptation are profound," Zixtal continued. "Humans can potentially reproduce at any time in any season under any circumstances. This gives them enormous advantages in colonization and population growth." A crystalline delegate stood up, their faceted body reflecting the auditorium lights. "Are you suggesting that humans have a reproductive advantage over other species?" they asked, their voice like the sound of wind chimes. "I am presenting the data," Zixtal replied. "The conclusions speak for themselves." This was not entirely true. Zixtal had drawn some very specific conclusions in their research, and those conclusions were becoming more dramatic with each slide. "Consider the colonization patterns," Zixtal said, showing a galactic map with human expansion marked in red. In just 50 years since joining the galactic community, humans have established settlements on over 30 worlds. Compare this to the thermal pods, who in 300 years have colonized only 5 worlds, timed precisely with their reproductive cycles. The thermal pod delegation began making agitated huffing sounds. Their leader, a large individual with particularly thick fur, stood up. "The thermal pod expansion strategy is careful and sustainable," they said. "We do not overwhelm ecosystems or outcompete native species." "I am not making judgments," Zixtel said, though their tone suggested otherwise. "I am simply observing that continuous fertility provides significant expansion advantages." Dr. Vasquez was looking increasingly uncomfortable in the front row. She raised her hand. "Zixtel, I think you may be misunderstanding some key aspects of human reproduction in society." But Zixtel was caught up in their presentation now. They had worked so hard on this research and the data seemed so clear to them. "The most concerning aspect," Zixtel continued, "is the lack of regulatory mechanisms. Most species have natural or social controls on reproduction. Seasonal cycles, government oversight, community decision-making, or biological limits. Humans appear to have none of these safeguards." The energy beings in the ceiling began flickering rapidly, which indicated extreme agitation. One of them manifested a voice. "Are you implying that humans are a reproductive threat to galactic stability?" "I am presenting possible scenarios based on mathematical models," Zixtal replied, advancing to a slide full of population projection graphs. "If current trends continue, human population could exceed the combined populations of the top 5 galactic species within 200 years. The auditorium erupted. Students and faculty began talking all at once, their voices creating a cacophony of concern, anger, and confusion. The hive mind delegation was vibrating with distress, their energy threads crackling with chaotic patterns. Several seasonal spawners from the Rigel system stood up and began moving toward the exits, clearly upset. "Order! Order!" called Professor Tekvar, the department head who had been watching from the side of the stage. The elderly gastropod's tentacles waved frantically as they tried to calm the crowd, but it was too late. The presentation had hit a nerve with multiple species. The implications Zixtal was suggesting challenged fundamental assumptions about how civilized species should manage their populations. A representative from the Andromedan Collective, a species known for their careful reproductive planning, stood up. "If what this student suggests is true, then humans represent a fundamental threat to galactic resource allocation and territorial balance." "Now wait just a minute," called out Jake Morrison from the audience. "You're making humans sound like some kind of breeding plague. That's not how we work at all. The data suggests otherwise," Zixtal said, though they were starting to feel like maybe their presentation was not going as planned. Dr. Vasquez stood up and walked toward the stage. "I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here," she said. "May I address the audience?" But before she could reach the podium, a new voice called out from the back of the auditorium. "Is it true that human males think about reproduction constantly?" This came from a young flux being whose energy form was pulsing with curiosity. "Do they require constant supervision to prevent uncontrolled breeding?" asked another voice. "How do human families control genetic selection without proper seasonal protocols?" called out yet another student. The questions kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. Zixtal realized that their presentation had somehow created the impression that humans were barely controlled breeding machines with no self-control or social structure. "Please, everyone," Dr. Vasquez called out, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The situation spiraled quickly out of control. Students began arguing among themselves about reproductive ethics, population control, and the responsibilities of spacefaring species. Some defended humans as simply having a different but valid approach to reproduction. Others expressed genuine concern about whether humans should be allowed to colonize freely, without some kind of galactic oversight. "Professor." Tekvar finally restored order by activating the auditorium's emergency quiet field, which dampened all sound for 30 seconds. In the sudden silence, every eye in the room turned to look at the mortified Zixtal, who suddenly realized they might have made a terrible mistake. When the quiet field deactivated, Dr. Vasquez spoke first. "I think," she said carefully, that we need to have a much longer conversation about human society and culture. This presentation, while clearly well-researched, is based on some fundamental misunderstandings about how humans actually live. But the damage was already done. As the audience filed out of the auditorium, Zixtal could hear fragments of worried conversations in dozens of languages. Their innocent research project had somehow become a warning about human reproductive imperialism. Zixtal slumped in their chair as the auditorium emptied, wondering how their quest for scientific understanding had gone so terribly wrong. Ambassador Chen Wei was enjoying a quiet cup of tea in her office when her communication device began flashing with urgent priority signals. She sighed and activated the holographic display, expecting another routine trade dispute or mining rights disagreement. Instead, she found herself looking at the concerned faces of 3 different galactic species representatives. Ambassador Chen, said Delegate Kreshta of the Crystalline Collective, their faceted body reflecting the communication lights in dizzying patterns. We need to discuss some very disturbing information that has come to our attention regarding human reproduction. Chen nearly choked on her tea. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We have received reports, continued Delegate Kreshta, that suggest humans may pose a significant reproductive threat to galactic stability. We understand that human males are in a constant state of biological readiness for reproduction, with no natural regulatory mechanisms. Chen set down her cup very carefully. Where exactly did you hear this? The second delegate, a thermal pod named Winterfur Brighteyes, leaned forward in their environmental suit. A student at Galactic University has presented comprehensive research on this topic. The data suggests that humans could potentially outbreed all other galactic species within a few centuries. The third delegate, representing the Andromedan Collective, added their concerns. Our population models indicate that unrestricted human reproduction could lead to resource conflicts and territorial disputes throughout known space. We believe this matter requires immediate galactic oversight. Chen rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. Delegates, I think there may be some significant misunderstandings here. Could you send me the research you're referring to? Within minutes, Chen's office computer was displaying Zixtal's presentation materials. As she read through the slides, her headache grew worse. The young Vorthak student had somehow managed to make human reproduction sound like a galactic emergency. The presentation was technically accurate in its basic facts, but it completely missed the social, cultural, and practical realities of how humans actually lived. It was like describing human transportation by focusing only on the fact that humans had legs and could theoretically walk 24 hours a day, while ignoring that most humans chose to sleep at night and used vehicles for long distances. Chen's emergency communication system activated again. This time it was her superior, Director Walsh. Calling from Earth. Chen. Walsh's voice crackled through the interstellar communication link. I've got reports coming in from 6 different sectors about concerns regarding human reproductive biology. What the hell is going on out there? A university student gave a presentation, Chen replied, summarizing the situation. They made human reproduction sound like a galactic threat. A student presentation caused this? Walsh sounded incredulous. Apparently it was a very convincing presentation, Chen said, looking at the data projections on her screen. And to be fair, if you don't understand human culture and society, some of these statistics could seem alarming. Within hours, the situation had escalated far beyond a simple academic misunderstanding. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss the human reproduction question, as it was now being called in official communications. Chen found herself standing before a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of whom were looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to outright suspicion. Ambassador Chen, spoke Council Leader Vexthran, an ancient gastropod whose tentacles moved slowly with age. The Council has received troubling reports about human reproductive capabilities and their potential impact on galactic demographics. We require clarification on this matter. Chen took a deep breath. Honored Council members, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about how human society functions. Is it true, interrupted a representative from the seasonal spawners, that human males are biologically capable of reproduction every day of their adult lives? Technically, yes, Chen admitted, but... And is it true, continued another delegate, That humans have no governmental oversight of reproductive decisions? That is also technically correct, but and is it accurate, called out a third voice, that humans have colonized over 30 worlds in just 50 years? Yes, but you're missing the crucial context. The facts speak for themselves, declared the representative from the Rigel Confederation. Humans appear to have unlimited reproductive potential with no natural or artificial controls. This is unprecedented in galactic history. Chen held up her hands for silence. Honored delegates, please allow me to explain the reality of human reproduction in society. The chamber quieted, and Chen began her impromptu defense of humanity's reproductive practices. Yes, human males are biologically capable of reproduction throughout their adult lives, she said. But this does not mean they are constantly focused on reproduction, any more than the fact that humans can theoretically eat 24 hours a day means they never stop eating. Some murmurs of confusion rippled through the chamber. Humans have developed complex social, cultural, and technological methods of family planning, Chen continued. Most humans spend the vast majority of their time focused on work, education, art, science, and other activities. Reproduction is just one small part of human life, not the dominant focus. But without natural regulatory mechanisms, pressed the crystalline delegate. How do you prevent overpopulation and resource depletion? We use education, birth control technology, and individual choice, Chen explained. Most humans in developed societies actually have fewer children than the replacement rate. Our population growth is slowing, not accelerating out of control. Individual choice? The hive mind representative seemed genuinely confused. But who ensures genetic diversity? Who plans for optimal population distribution? Who makes decisions for the good of the species? We trust individuals to make good decisions for themselves and their families, Chen replied. And it works. Human societies are stable, prosperous, and successful. The energy being representative flickered with skepticism. Your expansion patterns suggest otherwise. 30 worlds in 50 years indicates aggressive territorial acquisition. Our expansion is driven by curiosity, scientific research, and the desire for new opportunities, Chen said, not by population pressure. Many of our colony worlds are research stations or mining operations with very small populations. But Chen could see that her explanations were not entirely convincing the council. The delegates were still focused on the raw numbers and biological capabilities, without understanding the social context that shaped how those capabilities were actually used. Meanwhile, back at Galactic University, Zixtal was discovering that their presentation had created a campus-wide crisis. Alien students were asking worried questions about their human classmates. Some were avoiding humans altogether, fearing they might be exposed to uncontrolled reproductive behavior. Jake Morrison found Zixtal sitting alone in the cafeteria, looking miserable. Hey, Jake said, sitting down across from them. I heard about what happened at the council. I have ruined everything, Zixtal said sadly. I just wanted to understand human biology. Now everyone thinks humans are dangerous. Maybe we can fix this, Jake suggested. Dr. Vasquez wants to meet with us. She thinks we can clear up the misunderstanding if we work together. Dr. Vasquez had indeed been busy since the disastrous presentation. She had been contacted by Ambassador Chen and asked to help develop educational materials that would properly explain human reproduction in its full social and cultural context. The problem, Dr. Vasquez explained when Zixtal and Jake met with her, is that biological facts without social context can be very misleading. It's like describing thermal pod mating rituals by only mentioning that they grow special fur, without explaining the elaborate courtship ceremonies and family approval processes. But my research was accurate, Zixtal protested. Your biological facts were correct, Dr. Vasquez agreed, but you missed the bigger picture. Humans don't live as pure biological creatures. We live as social beings with complex cultures, technologies, and individual decision-making processes. How do we fix this? Zixtal asked. Dr. Vasquez smiled. We're going to need to do some more research. But this time we're going to study not just the biology, but the whole picture of how humans actually live and reproduce in their natural social environment. As news of the council meeting spread through galactic communication networks, the human reproduction question was becoming a topic of debate across dozens of worlds. Some species were calling for reproductive monitoring of human colonies. Others were demanding restrictions on human expansion. Until the matter could be resolved, the simple academic presentation had somehow managed to create one of the most serious diplomatic challenges in recent galactic history, all based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how biological capabilities related to actual behavior. Chen knew that if this situation wasn't resolved quickly and convincingly, it could seriously damage humanity's standing in the galactic community. The irony was that humans were probably one of the most reproductively responsible species in the galaxy, but their biological flexibility had been misinterpreted as a threat. 2 months later, the campus of Galactic University was buzzing with activity as species from across the galaxy prepared for the annual diversity celebration. The festival had been held for over a century, but this year was special. For the first time, it would include a comprehensive presentation on reproductive strategies as cultural expression. Zixtal stood in the main plaza, watching the setup with nervous excitement. Their 4 eyes tracked the movements of students hanging decorations, setting up display booths, and testing holographic equipment. After weeks of intensive research and collaboration with Dr. Vasquez, Jake, and representatives from dozens of species, they were finally ready to present their findings in a completely new way. "You ready for this?" Jake asked, approaching with a steaming cup of something that smelled like chocolate and cinnamon. "I think so," Zixtal replied, accepting the warm drink gratefully, "though I am still amazed that anyone is willing to listen to me after the disaster of my first presentation." Dr. Vasquez joined them, carrying a tablet full of final preparations. "People make mistakes," she said kindly. "What matters is that you learned from it and worked to fix it." "That's very human of you, actually." Zixtal had indeed learned a great deal over the past 2 months. Working with Dr. Vasquez and Jake, they had conducted a completely different kind of research. Instead of focusing only on biological capabilities, they had studied how different species actually lived, loved, and made decisions about reproduction within their cultural contexts. The results had been eye-opening. As the evening began, beings from across the galaxy gathered in the university's largest amphitheater. Ambassador Chen was there, along with several council delegates who had agreed to attend after Dr. Vasquez assured them this would be a very different kind of presentation. "Welcome, everyone," Zixtal began, their voice steady and confident. "Tonight I want to share with you the most beautiful discovery of my academic career. The incredible diversity of ways that intelligent species approach reproduction, family, and community." The first holographic display showed not charts and statistics, but images of families from different worlds, thermal pod parents with their fluffy offspring playing in snow caves, crystalline beings connecting their young to the collective through glowing energy threads, human parents teaching their children to ride bicycles. "My previous research focused only on biological capabilities," Zixtal continued. "I made the mistake of thinking that biology determines behavior. But what I have learned is that intelligence creates choice, and choice creates culture." The audience was listening attentively. Even the council delegates seemed relaxed, a marked change from the tension of 2 months ago. "Let me tell you about the seasonal spawners of Rigel 4, Zixtal said, advancing to their next display. "Their synchronized reproduction creates the most beautiful community bonds I have ever studied. When the spawning season arrives, the entire society comes together in celebration. Families that haven't spoken all year reconcile their differences. Artists create magnificent displays to honor new life. The whole planet becomes a symphony of cooperation and joy." The Rigelian delegates in the audience straightened with pride. No one had ever described their reproductive culture in such positive terms. "The parthenogenic scholars of the Andromeda sector," Zixtal continued, "have developed something equally amazing. Their ability to reproduce without partners means that knowledge and wisdom can pass directly from parent to child. Imagine having instant access to your parents' memories and experiences. Their society advances incredibly quickly because each generation literally builds on the last." The Andromedan representative flickered with pleased surprise. They had always felt that other species didn't understand the advantages of their reproductive system. "The crystalline hive minds have created something I find truly wonderful," Zixtal said, showing images of crystal beings sharing their thoughts through energy connections. "When they reproduce, they don't just create new individuals. They expand the collective consciousness itself. Each new mind adds to the shared experience and wisdom of the whole species." The crystalline delegates began glowing more brightly, their faceted bodies reflecting their pleasure at this recognition. Zixtal continued through presentation after presentation, highlighting the unique advantages and beautiful aspects of reproductive strategies across the galaxy. The thermal pod's careful timing that ensured optimal survival rates, the energy being's ability to merge consciousness during reproduction, the gastropod's ancient wisdom traditions passed down through careful genetic selection. Finally, they came to humans. And then there are humans, Zixtal said, showing images of human families in all their diversity. At first I thought their continuous fertility was a threat. I couldn't understand how they controlled it. But what I discovered is that humans have developed the most sophisticated reproductive culture in the galaxy. The audience leaned forward with interest. Humans have separated biological capability from reproductive behavior more completely than any other species, Zixtal explained. This gives them incredible flexibility. They can choose when to reproduce based on personal readiness, economic stability, emotional maturity, and individual desires. They can delay reproduction to pursue education or careers. They can choose partners based on compatibility rather than biological timing. Ambassador Chen smiled from her seat in the audience. This was exactly the kind of explanation she had been hoping for. But most importantly, Zixtal continued, humans have learned to find fulfillment and purpose in many different ways. Some humans reproduce and raise families. Others dedicate themselves to art, science, exploration, or service to their communities. Some do both. Some change their minds over time. The flexibility of their reproductive system allows for this incredible diversity of life paths. The holographic display showed humans engaged in dozens of different activities, scientists in laboratories, artists creating sculptures, teachers working with children, explorers on distant planets, doctors helping patients. What I initially saw as a threat, I now recognize as humanity's greatest strength, Zixtal said. They have evolved beyond the limitations of biological determinism. They can be whatever they choose to be. A thermal pod in the audience raised their hand. But doesn't this lead to chaos? Without natural controls, how do they make good decisions? Jake stood up from his seat. We make mistakes sometimes, he said honestly. But we also learn from them. Our society has developed education systems, counseling services, and support networks to help people make good choices. And most humans do make good choices because we want what's best for ourselves, our families, and our communities. What about overpopulation? Asked a crystalline delegate. Dr. Vasquez answered this one. Actually, most developed human societies have birth rates below replacement level. Having the ability to reproduce whenever we want doesn't mean we always want to. Many humans are choosing to have smaller families or no families at all because they have other goals and interests. And expansion? Pressed an energy being. We expand because we're curious, Ambassador Chen replied. We want to learn, explore, and find new opportunities. Not because we're running out of room for too many children. The questions continued for over an hour, but the tone was completely different from the previous presentation. Instead of fear and suspicion, there was genuine curiosity and interest. Species were sharing their own reproductive challenges and asking for advice. The thermal pods wanted to know more about human family planning methods. The energy beings were curious about how humans maintained individual identity within pair bonds. As the formal presentation ended, something beautiful began to happen. Students from different species started approaching each other with questions and conversations. The crystalline beings wanted to understand human concepts of romantic love. The humans were fascinated by the thermal pod's community-wide reproductive celebrations. Zixtal found themselves surrounded by students eager to learn more about comparative reproductive biology. But this time they were asking about the cultural and social aspects, not just the biological facts. You know, said a young Rigelian student, I never thought about how different reproductive strategies might create different kinds of art and music. Humans have love songs, but we have spawning symphonies. Both are beautiful in their own way. I want to study human family structures, announced a crystalline being. The idea of choosing your own life partner seems terrifying and exciting at the same time. Dr. Vasquez appeared at Zixtal's side. I think, she said with a smile, that you've created something much more valuable than your original research. You've helped everyone understand that diversity is strength, not threat. Ambassador Chen approached them with several council delegates in tow. The council has asked me to thank you, she said to Zixtal. Your presentation tonight has resolved a significant diplomatic situation. More importantly, it's opened up new avenues for cultural exchange and understanding. I am just glad I could fix my mistake, Zixtal replied humbly. It wasn't a mistake, Chen said. It was incomplete information. Now it's complete. As the evening wound down, Zixtal found themselves sitting with Jake and Dr.